Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen July 26th special meeting. Call the meeting to order at 7:37. What I'd first like to say is anybody that speaks this evening, if they could please get up, stand at the microphone, and give us your name and address for the record. What I'd like to do this evening is I'd like to introduce to those, I know there's a lot of people in town who don't know who anybody is, and we have members from the MBTA Rail Committee, our Rail Committee here, and our Board of Selectmen. Sean Finnegan wasn't able to make it this evening because of a prior engagement. We tried to get everybody from both committees together, and we weren't able to do that. To my left is the Town Manager, Dexter Malone.
No, wait, hold it. Hold it.
Dexter Blois. Why, you don't want to stay there? Oh, okay. To my far right is Rob Scherer, Selectman Barry Bresnick, Arnold Baker, David Teller, me, from the MBTA Rail Committee. We have here Kathy Galinsky, Frank Healy, James Reedy, and Jack Kelly. And I think that's all we have. Somebody else coming in, but it's nobody from there. I know everybody in town, I'm going to give a little update on the current work that you see working over on Cherry Street. I know there was a lot of interest over the weekend. This week, myself, Dexter, and the police chief, we met with, if I can get it here, Conrail, and the information that was gathered was we were trying to find out what work was being done on the T. I walked the T tracks last week, spoke to a Conrail employee who advised us that the Conrail was doing work on the tracks for the switching for the MBTA stations. His information that most of you have read stating that the work was being done for our station and the stations from here to Worcester. The person that we spoke to that came to Town Hall was from the project engineer for design and construction. He came out from Selkirk, New York. The information that was brought to us was that the work was being done by Conrail for the MBTA in anticipation for the MBTA train stations. The work is going to be done from Framingham to Worcester. Now, this work is being done now because the work will require them until December of 1996. It will take them to fulfill that work. They started in Ashland, and they're working on the switching. The actual location of those switches has to be as close to Cherry Street as they can to get the train station somewhere in the Pleasant Street area on both sides of the track. So it'll go from that area towards Southborough. That is the workable area, as we know right now, that the T is looking at. And that's what we know as of right now. We know that there's one set of switching and tracks that was put in last Sunday. They anticipate doing some more work on the second crossover on the 27th of August. I think it's on a Sunday also. They will be out there working. They will be in Ashland for a while working. Specifically, they will be working on the tracks. And that's basically as much as we know at this point with Conrail. Conrail is doing the work for the MBTA. They were hired by the MBTA to do this work. What I'd like to do is give a brief overview of the MBTA station. This has been an ongoing process for the last over 3 years. Many of these board members that are here were not here, including myself, when this original process started. It was brought forth to the town. The MBTA wanted to put a station in the town of Ashland. They originally were going to go downtown Ashland, but they were looking at 500 spaces, which the town couldn't do. It wouldn't fit. The town then bought property from Conrail, in which you see where the park is and everything is down there. This has now been going on since then. A rail committee was formed. The rail committee, and I think, Dexter, do you have the booklet that we were trying to understand? Is it right here? There was a report to the Ashland Board of Selectmen back in, we think, 1990. It's not dated. 1992. Okay, should there be an MBTA commuter rail station in Ashland? This was a report to the Ashland Board of Selectmen and the Ashland Town Manager. It was prepared by, at that time, the Ashland MBTA Rail Committee, which consisted of a Dex Malone chair, Alden Dort vice chair, John Whiteman clerk, Doris Overturf, Robert Gonfradi, Robert Danker, and Carl Gross. At that point, the Conrail had come in, presented a lot of information to the residents of the town of Ashland. It started, a lot of the meetings were at the high school. They had boards and graphs showing what their anticipations were. The Rail Committee was, as members got off and on, new committee members got involved, and this has been an ongoing process over the last 2.5 years that I know of. Many sites were looked at. The original site that was looked at was out on Howe Street. One of the complications with Howe Street was the access in and out of there. All traffic would have to come through Ashland in any form of direction. The other problem with Howe Street at that time was that Southborough said, that they were going to go online, and it was too close to Southborough. And Ashland did not want to be a central station or a huge parking lot at that time, and with Southborough's anticipation of coming online, the switch went to look further down in different areas. Most of the functions were looked at along Pleasant Street. The Church of the Latter Rain was basically in that area, that empty lot in the Church of the Latter Rain was looked at. Up and down Pleasant Street, I know the Rail Committee basically worked on doing this. I'm going to kind of give you my overview of what I know, and I'm going to try to turn it over to the Rail Committee to, anywhere that I've missed on that information. The Rail Committee looked at all different locations up and along Pleasant Street. We found out that through the figures that the T had given us, that the projection was a lot higher than anticipated. At that point, we realized that most of the traffic, or almost half the traffic, would be coming out of Holliston. And at that time, we suggested to the T that they should look on the south side of the tracks, of which they did, and we were going to have a parking lot on both sides of the tracks, with an access road off of 135. And the reason for doing that was to alleviate the traffic, which we've already overburdened with traffic, and try to bring the traffic that's coming out of Holliston and down Main Street and bring it left and into a parking lot to keep the traffic minimal impact to the downtown area. That went up and down Pleasant Street on site locations, which was considered, when the Church of the Latter Rain deal fell through, they looked further east, and the east location was up along somewhere in Magunko Road area. It wasn't definite, the exact area, and the west site was down along near Burnham's and that area. At that point, when the deal fell through for the Church of the Latter Rain, they continued on those two, became the main focus of the board and the Rail Committee. The Rail Committee continued to work, finding out numbers and figures and traffic amounts, and the sizes of the parking lots were a huge consideration. The original anticipation was started around 400 or 500 car parking lot. The Rail Committee asked the T for actual figures, or better figures. They didn't feel as though that the number of figures that were given to them as far as the traffic amounts and drop-off were correct. The T went back, recalculated, and came back with much higher figures, and that's where the 700-car parking lot came into effect. From that point, the Rail Committee had made a recommendation at that time, based on the information that was given to them by the T, that the west wet area on the south side of the tracks was wet and could not be built. There wasn't, I would say, a favorite area at that time for the Rail Committee. Most of the members did still prefer the west site. They changed to the east site, and the reason they changed to the east site, as far as we know, and as far as the meetings I attended to, was because of the information that was outlined to them by the T on the wetlands. A letter came to the Board of Selectmen with their recommendation for the EIR report, in which the Board of Selectmen endorsed the Rail Committee site, stating that one of the reasons being the Rail Committee had done a lot of work, put a lot of hard hours into it. It was a committee that had been appointed and reappointed by the Board of Selectmen to do this legwork. With further review from the board and feedback, we found out that maybe the west site was not as what they said. We had asked them when they looked at the east site to also, as they were looking at the east location, to do the same thing with the west. We wanted to see both locations. The T went on the fast track and was working on the east and kind of slacking off on the west side. There was previous meetings, numerous meetings on that, where we requested information from the T on the west. We weren't getting it. At that point, the Board of Selectmen requested that we hire our own person to go out and check the wetlands. Our environmentalists came back and said that the wetlands on the west could be built. We went back to the T and we asked for the 30% drawings which they had done on the east to come back on the west. We received those back, showing both locations could be a viable option. From that point, the Rail Committee had a number of other issues and concerns and continued on until a few weeks, about a month ago, where the Rail Committee ruled out the east side along with the Board of Selectmen and moved their preferred site to the west site. Some of the main concerns for ruling out the east side are, I know a lot of you are aware of the EPA issue on Nyanza. The property owners on the east site have lived with their property for 16 years. They have been attached by the EPA. They can't put a shovel in the ground. They can't do anything with their property. If and when their property is sold, there's about a $27 million assessment to those property owners that they would have to pay for the cleanup of Nyanza, even though these property owners, which a lot of them bought their property after, are still part of the cleanup and settlement. If the MBTA came in and purchased their property, they would pay them. I'm not sure what they would pay them, but if they said that their value of their property was worth zero because it's contaminated, but we're going to be good sports and we're going to give you fair market value. And they paid them maybe for their 2 acres or 3 acres or whatever it may be. They give them $200,000 or $300,000. The EPA could step in and take that money. The property owner would then be without his land, his business, or anything. At that point, the Board of Selectmen, when we moved our preferred site to the west, that was one of the considerations. And to back that consideration up, we had a joint meeting. We all voted, the Rail Committee and the Board of Selectmen. It was a unanimous decision to the west site, and that's where we're at this time. Frank, do you have any? I can give you the mic if you want.
I guess I'm on the hook here. That's the gist of what transpired. I've been on the committee about 3 years now. There's no committee member here tonight who was one of the originals. The general consensus originally when we decided going to the east site was based on information from the T that they couldn't build on the west site because of the wetlands. There was a considerable opinion on the committee that that probably may not be true, so that's why we asked the selectmen to get an independent evaluation. That came back, as David said, and turns out that with some creative design, we could put something on the west side. The thing was revisited. From our perspective, the tax impact on the town was much less going on the west side. It gave us the ability to constrain expansion by physical landmarks. You've got bridges and wetlands. The T just can't come in and just mow the thing down and put a lot more parking. That's one of the reasons, and from my perspective, that we decided to go with the west alternative. Given parking on the south side of the tracks and the north side of the tracks, the original projections were based on figures from the Central Transportation Planning staff from 1980 census. Our feeling was that those probably should have been changed. That's when we asked for revised numbers, and we got the revised numbers from the 1990 census from the Central Transportation Planning staff, which showed the marked increase in population south of the tracks. And the projections were for, I forget what the numbers were, 75, 80% of the commuters coming from south of the tracks. Therefore, the lion's share of the parking should be on the south side. When the original conversation started, the parking was only going to be on the north side of the tracks. That was going to devastate downtown was going to be gridlock. And that's one of the reasons we decided, I forget who made the recommendation, might have been John Ellsworth, as a matter of fact, to split the parking, put parking on both sides of the tracks to alleviate the process from downtown. The access road as part of this would also help alleviate that. Our feeling, as an aside, is that it would open up potential development up in that area when and if anything is able to transpire. And that's basically where we're at. We made a recommendation for the west site. Letters have been written, requests have been made to the T. To the best of my knowledge, we really haven't got much in the way of responses back yet.
We did, to follow up on that, on our letter that went to, that you have, a lot of you have in front of you, I hope most of you, we did run out of them. We did get a response today, a telephone call that our town manager, Dexter Blois, did make, and it was a request because we hadn't heard. They did have the letter, and they said that they would get a response to us in a few days. So as of today, it was the first day that we did get any type of communications with them. What I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to read a letter that was presented to the Board of Selectmen from the Ashland Business Association. A lot of people have asked what the business community had thought. The Ashland Board of Selectmen from the Ashland Business Association, July 12, 1995, via the MBTA site in Ashland. At the ABA's July meeting, the members present discussed the future site of the MBTA here in Ashland. The majority of members present objected to the east site as it would displace 14 fellow business owners. We further voted to support the Board of Selectmen with their selection of the west site. If neither of these sites are chosen, we will discuss the matter again. As business owners in Ashland, we would like the Selectmen to know that we are interested and supportive of the situation. There are 50 financially active business owners in the Ashland Business Association, and they feel strongly for our town and its economic development. Thank you for being so thorough on your endeavors concerning the MBTA coming to Ashland. And it was signed by the President and Vice President of the Association. At this time, what I'd like to do is, before we open up questions to the general audience, I wanted to know if there was any comments. First, I was going to go through the Board of Selectmen, and then I would go through the real committee. Those are there. But they will ask us the questions. Well, I'm not sure whether everybody out there wanted to do that. That was something that wasn't given to us for that. Rob, do you want to make any comments or statements at this time?
Just briefly, because I'm sure people want to get to their questions. I've been personally involved in this process for about 3 years as a citizen. I went to one of the first big public meetings concerning the housing site 3 years ago. Elected to the Board of Selectmen just a few months ago. During the campaign, I sent out about 2,000 pieces of mail, and on it I said that I'm in favor of an MBTA rail commuter station to enhance, not overwhelm, our town. Can everybody hear me all right? I'm really good. As I said, I've gone on record as being generally in favor of an MBTA station in this town. Okay. Can everybody hear me? I've gone on record as being in favor of a T station if it can be done the right way, one that will enhance, not overwhelm our town. I've said that openly, and that's what I'd like to do, and I think we've put together a plan, at least initially as it seems now, that gives us a reasonable shot at doing that, but it's still uncertain, and we've gone through a long process, which I've only recently become formally involved in, and there's a negotiating committee that's been appointed, consists of Dexter Blois, the town manager, myself, and Sean Finnegan, who's not here tonight, to speak to the T. We've got a long list of issues, mitigation measures, things that, also on that letter, if you look at a number of other conditions that the town has on it, you know, the parking lot size, which has been a source of disagreement between the rail committee and the selectmen, and we can get into that if people want to. The fact that the access road is mandatory, and there's a number of other things and other traffic mitigation measures that hopefully will make this station workable. I think everyone is pretty well has the same orientation that if we don't get certain things on that, that we're going to have a problem with having a train station in this town, and that we're prepared to oppose it at that point. So I just wanted to make some of those things clear. And as Dave just said, we'll hopefully be starting discussions with the T in the near future. So I'm happy, I'm glad many people have turned out that haven't been involved in the past. We tried to do the best we could in terms of looking at that location and its possible effects, but there may be, apparently there's some things we missed or concerns we didn't address, and I'm sure we'll hear about those tonight. Again, the access road is key. People weren't assuming that there's going to be a lot of traffic on High Street. We're going after the very opposite to avoid traffic on High Street. I think that'll...
I'm primarily here to listen, especially at this point. I'm very interested in what people have to say in terms of comments and concerns. I expect that every one of your questions will be answered to the best of our abilities at the moment, but understand that this is still a very fluid situation, and there are some answers that at this point would be incomplete. So with that, I just as soon hear from everybody else.
No, what I'm just trying to do is exactly what I said. I wanted the board to say anything they want before any questions are asked, and the rail committee, if they have any.
I just wanted to clarify. I'm new on the board, but I'm not a neophyte to the process. Some time ago, I favored the Telecron site. I feel the curve and the tracks could be rectified, even though it'll be a tremendous financial responsibility, as long as it's in the town of Ashland. But I have questions that I want to, answers I want to give. I'll wait till the proper time. But my feeling was and is, and it's no secret that I was spokesman for the McGunkle Road Group. I felt very strongly about the fact that we couldn't displace 14 businesses. Some of them have been there 3 or 4 decades, and that's my stand. I would go for the Telecron site, and the board did negate the East site, which I think is, you have to look at things objectively, and I'm sure that John Ellsworth, who wrote quite a report here, and I respect that, was on the Board of Selectmen, and John knows that. John knows that only too well. And we just have to do what we think is right in the better interest of what we feel is the right decision, and that's one of the reasons that I took the stand that I took before the fact and after the fact. So I will have some input relative to question 10 particularly, and that's all for now. Thank you. Other than that, we'll listen. Thank you.
And just to review everybody else, is wondering where everybody's coming from. I originally started attending these meetings a number of years ago, basically because I was kind of interested because the area that they were talking about was on Pleasant Street. I live off of Fox Hill Road, which is off of Corderville Road. I was very concerned about the traffic at that time because the traffic impact on Corderville Road, which is the main truck route in and out of Ashland. And I started attending the meetings, and the longer I got into them, the more I saw, and I saw reasons why different things changed from one area to another. Realized some of the implications, which I said originally, you know, well, you can't put it there, you should put it there. And basically, my feelings are now that I'd like to see a station in town if it's done appropriately. I do not want to be a regional station. I think the town of Ashland is already overburdened with traffic. I think we should all be very concerned about that. I also understand that to underbuild the station could also cause an impact. By underbuilding the station, I realize that we could have traffic problems along the streets and into neighborhoods. I know a lot went into the thought process of the sizes. I know it was hashed out between the boards, back and forth. And what we did is we took a stand. I think we had to come together. We had to come to some kind of an agreement among the boards because we had to move forward because the T is moving very fast. And if we sat back and waited any longer, we would be with a station in the town of Ashland in a place that we don't want it with no input. And the process that we're in right now, I think, is very good. I think this is a great turnout. I think the involvement is great, and what we have to do is we have to keep the pressure on the T, and we have to work together as a town, as the boards, and as a community to make sure that we get the information to the T that comes forth in this meeting and every meeting, so that we have the best train station, if we're going to have one in town, that has the least impact on the residents in the town. We'll go into questions in a minute. I didn't know if anybody from the Rail Committee wanted to make a statement. No, okay. I want you to know I do have a copy of the McGunkle Hill Voice, which has a number of questions, some very good questions. There's many ways for me to do this. We could actually go down these questions, or if members from the audience would like to get up and ask these questions or specific questions, we can do it that way too. I originally was going to go down from question 1 through 13, and then if there was any questions that preceded that, I would ask that you would get up and do that. And if that's okay with everybody, I would like to proceed that way. Question 1 is the foregone conclusion that the T station will definitely be built in Ashland, and if so, where? My opinion and other opinions might vary. I personally think a T station will come into the town, whether we want one or we don't. I think it's in our best interest to work as a community with the T to make sure we get the least impact on the town and the best value. We want to make sure that we can get traffic mitigation and problems done. And what I'd like to do at this time, I know that Mr. Reedy is very informed on stations where communities didn't agree and with some impacts that were placed. Jim, if you can just explain on, I think it was...
Well, basically it's like Malden, when the T wanted to expand the lines through that area, Malden said no, and the T came in, and eminent domain, they built the station. So the thing is, the governor, this is the governor's pet project, to bring the trains to the western sites. They have to have stations. Ashland is the spot for one, Grafton, so on and so forth. If we don't work with the T will build a station. They've done it in other areas. And right now, the T is pretty much going the way they've always gone things. Just kind of sit back and say, well, maybe the town's now working with this, and then all of a sudden the T can say, hey, we tried, and before you know it, we'll have a station. And we've got to work together.
Anybody else that would like to comment further on that question? Yes, if you would go up and just identify yourself. Yes. Even though we know.
Shirley Morissette, 34 High Street. I spoke with Senator Magnani last night. He said that there is a choice we do have. We can call a special town meeting and vote on whether or not we want a T. And then if we vote not to have a T, then he or John Stefanini would put a bill before the legislature, and it would then be voted on by the legislature. Now, I don't know whether anybody's interested in that, but that is the procedure that could be done.
How many people do you need to do it? How many people do you need to put that on the ballot? How would that be done? You know. Would it be on a ballot?
No, ballot question's not final.
Okay.
It'd have to be a town meeting vote. We're just discussing the mechanics of...
I'm just finding out how you can do exactly what you're saying. Right, it would require 100 signatures. It would be presented to the board, and at that point, we could call for a special town meeting.
Just as a matter of process, 200 signatures on a petition could direct the selectmen to call a special town meeting. 100 signatures on a petition would include an article in that special town meeting warrant. It takes approximately 30 to 35 days to call a special town meeting. We just had one, and everybody got postcards and the process that we have to go through. There more than likely will be a special town meeting in the fall. Typically, traditionally, the town has had one mid-October to mid-November. So that's another avenue that would not necessitate a 200 signature petition, because the selectmen call that special town meeting to do fall business that needs to be attended to between the annual town meetings. So that's a process to do. Mr. Teller suggested a ballot question. A ballot question of this nature is not binding and would have no effect. And that's kind of contradictory, because you would think that voters at an election on a ballot might have more clout with the legislature, but the legislature recognizes home rule petitions that come out of town meetings, not out of the ballot box. So a town meeting vote that asked for a bill to be filed by the legislature and in effect have the legislature vote. I'm not sure what the process is after that, after it gets to Boston, and how much effect that would have, and be binding on the T to direct legislation to direct the T not to build a station in Ashland. I don't know what the process is on that. You got to appreciate, though, that the governor's kind of direction for the future for his Economics 2000 is to have this rail station and commuter rail and kind of do away with pollution from automobiles. So the governor's push is to do this, and that's what we would be facing to go against, or to have the legislation filed. Granted, the legislation is democratic, but the governor's veto power and how the, a veto of the bill, and then to turn that around. It's a convoluted process, and I don't know how successful it would be. It's something, if Mrs. Morris said, if you found that that's something that our legislators would entertain, it certainly is a process that could be done, and more discussion with the selectmen at a regular selectmen's meeting as to an article or as to the intent of action of town meeting, I think would be entertainable.
Just a little, bring some reality into this. If a special town meeting is held and a vote is taken, and then we go to the Senator Magnani or Stefanini and ask them to file a bill, there's a period of time, because they've got to get consensus, the whole 9 yards. The T is on the hook to get this done by October of '96. It takes approximately 8 months to build it. That means they're going to start construction February, March of next year. Once it's started, because the station construction, not the track part of it, the legislature's not going to say, well, stop the train. It isn't going to work. The trains are coming anyway. It's just a matter of whether we want them to stop. It may be a nice idea if we thought about it a year and a half ago, but I think practically it's probably too late.
If or when a T station is built, do citizens of Ashland, and in particular residents of affected areas, have any part in the decision-making process? Anybody else want to take this one?
No, you're doing very well.
I was alone at the last meeting. This isn't fair. Well, the citizens of the town do have a process. We do have a process, and do you have any input? Basically, there's been citizen input for the last 2 or 3 years. In the particular area that you're in, yes, you do. There will be discussions and concerns coming up about mitigation, traffic impact, and all the issues that directly affect certain neighborhoods and communities, intersections and everything. What the board did, we felt as though that this was a high priority that had to be done. Instead of all 5 of us trying to work this out with the town manager and the T, we formed a subcommittee. The subcommittee was Sean Finnegan and Rob Scheer with the town manager. Those will be meetings that the citizens could have input into. So yes, there is a lot still to be said. There's still a long way to go. Basically, what we have to do first before anything's done is have the site approved by the T and reach a conclusion on the agreements of which we've set forth to them. And then, yes, there is some citizen input that will still be going on. You still will have your say in many issues. Sure. No. Well, we haven't heard from them. We've been trying to hear from the T for several months. Our first contact was today. I knew we were having the meeting. I saw Dexter yesterday. He said he had made a call. He couldn't get through to anybody. We met again this morning. He made another call. He finally did get through. His answer was, yes, we did receive your letter, and we will get back with a response in a few days.
Dave, maybe if I could...
Once we do get the response, then we will actually have some solid basis to go on.
There have been a number of issues raised, both during, one thing that we haven't talked about much, is this on, is the whole EIR process, the Environmental Impact Report process, which has been going on for several years, and that, you know, the T has periodically put out written analysis and reports that have been commented upon. In those reports and in the discussions we've had, there's been a whole list of kind of issues that both the Rail Committee and ourselves have talked about. We didn't put all those issues into that letter. You know, there's issues about the access road, the intersection on Route 135. There's been concerns raised about traffic impacts. The intersection at High Street, of course, was commented on a few years ago for the first time and has been talked about since then. The T did traffic analysis in their report. This is the EIR, the latest. So there's all this. We're 1/5 of this is Ashland generally, since there's like 5 stations. So there are a number of issues that we have. Just the ones that I could think of is, you know, that bridge at Corderville and Pleasant, you know, and that whole structure there has been a concern. What's going to happen there, and if something needs to be done there. The construction of the access road, effect on other intersections such as Chestnut Street in Pleasant and Maine, which wasn't covered in their report. So there's a whole list of things that aren't in that letter. That letter was meant to be a general summary laying down the major points that we had reached consensus on and outlined most of the issues. And the details are now to follow. And I don't think, we haven't figured out exactly the future role of the Rail Committee and exactly the process for future discussions with the T, other than to appoint this negotiating committee to go down these lists of issues and report back to the full Board of Selectmen.
And basically, if you're reading the letter under number 5, what Rob is saying is what we've briefed, and basically it's saying regarding the impact of the station and mitigation measures, and that's basically everything he's saying. We couldn't detail each individual street location, so mitigation and impact of the town will ought to come under that discussion. I think everybody did get a copy of this, but if you didn't, there's basically, the points are, our conditions to the T in the letter that we sent were, the Ashland station must be located at the western alternative site, the one adjacent to the High Street and near Burnham's Restaurant. The so-called east site is hereby rejected from further consideration as a viable option for a station location. The town will consider parking lot designs accommodating no more than 450 car space total. The access road from Route 135 to the southerly parking lot, as previously agreed, must be constructed and constructed to town standards. A committee consisting of the town manager, Selectman Scher, and Finnegan will represent the Board of Selectmen in all decisions regarding the impact of the station and mitigation measures associated therewith. And an equitable formula for Ashland's MBTA assessment must be established as an integral part of the acceptance by the town of Ashland as a station site. The Board is willing, through its representatives, to further discuss the location of a commuter rail station in Ashland. Please contact the town manager to arrange a mutually convenient date and time to commence negotiations. We haven't got a response to that, and we hope to have that in a few days, and we'll start our negotiation from there. I think most people realize that Ashland pays an assessment of over $300,000 a year to the T, and that's one of the major concerns that we have. Towns going online like Southborough, Westborough, town of Franklin, which has a station, pay no assessment to the T. Let me just get the person to speak. If we can go to the speaker, it would be easier because cable will pick it up. They can't hear you from the seat on TV when we play it back.
David, Robert Hebden on High Street. Looking at your locus map that's on page 3, and looking at the report that the Board of Selectmen submitted to the General Manager, my concern is that when the original site was looked at up on House Street, up where the old skating rink was. The concern was the access roads to it were very limited, and I agree with that. Corderville Road in one that you had mentioned, and obviously House Street. I would submit to you that Corderville Road and well, at least Corderville Road is equal to 495 compared to High Street. You'd have all you could do to get 2 horse and buggies side by side coming down High Street. If the board really truly wants that west site, why don't they limit it to the new side only, to the south side only, with the access road coming out, and delete the north side of the tracks completely? Because everyone sitting here in the audience knows that the true route to that north side of the tracks is going to be High Street for Holliston and Hopkinton residents. And if you think Corderville Road is going to be a nightmare, High Street will make it look like a kindergarten. So what's the problem with just eliminating the north side and have the south side only at that west site?
Bob, you're saying that the traffic will come from...
I'm not opposed to the west side. If we feel that's the best site because we're not going to relocate all the businesses down at the east side, then pick the west site where it shows on your map here, the larger lot of the two,
Okay.
with the access road coming out to 135.
Right.
Okay? And let that be the T station. And eliminate the north side where Burnham's parking lot is. Because there's only one way that truly the people from Holliston and Hopkinton are going to get to the Burnham's parking lot, and that's via High Street.
Why would the residents from Holliston, who will come down Prospect Street to Main Street, how would they get up there? You said
Anybody that's over near Holliston High School will come the backside and come out by Western Nurseries and come across the side. That's the easiest way without facing any traffic. That's the way most everyone on High Street would get over to Holliston High School. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out the easiest way to get to that parking lot is to come over that way. Hopkinton, who will use this more probably than we will, they're going to come by Western Nursery via High Street.
They're going to come out by the Knights of Columbus, and they're going to go all the way...
No, they're not. They're going to come down 135, they're going to hook a left at Western Nurseries and come down High Street to Burnham's.
Bob, can I defer you to John Ellsworth? Because I can remember well sitting at a meeting of the T with John, and this is on a daytime meeting that we sat with representatives of the T, John, and the maps that they had for traffic that you and I had colored in and pointed out to the T that the traffic from the north, there was 75 or 80, whatever the number was from the south, from Holliston, Hopkinton, and so forth, but the station on the north side, to reduce that in size because the numbers coming from the north, that is Southborough, Marlborough, Hudson, and so forth, was a lot smaller, and the direct route down Corderville Road to that northerly station didn't necessitate such a large station. There was never any discussion or traffic counts or whatever that indicated traffic was going to come over High Street to get to the southerly station. But he is right. No, I'm just... Excuse me. John and I participated in discussions that went over the traffic counts with the T some year and a half, almost 2 years ago, probably. I know it was when I was early on in Ashland. And
Dexter, they just sourced it. They didn't say how it would get there. They just sourced it. They said it would come out of Holliston and South Ashland. They didn't say how it would get there. They made assumptions that may not be true.
but the traffic counts that they had, whatever the numbers were, they had traffic counts or projections of traffic counts that came from the north equaled the number of parking spaces in the northerly lot and the amounts from the south that you had calculated to the southerly lot. So, but again, you're right, there was no mention of how they were going to get there, but logically, it doesn't seem that somebody that has access to the southerly lot on a main road, there's traffic on 135 already, would take a route such as, I don't know what the roads are, Cross Street or Franklin Road or whatever,
Right,
and
it would
wind
be,
around
it would
and
be
about.
Cross Street to High Street. But if you come down 135 in the morning and see the traffic going by Ashland High School with the school buses and whatever, the shortcut is going to be Western Nurseries, High Street to the parking lot. It's exactly what's going to happen. And, you know...
If there's no way to park, where are they going to go?
Pardon?
If there's no way to park over there and it's a small lot, where are they going to do? They're going to do it once?
Why wouldn't there be any spaces to park? Southborough's going to have its own lot up there. whether they like it or not, according to what we're told. So Southborough isn't gonna come down and park on the north side. My question is, what's wrong with limiting the site to the west side and to the south side only?
It could be a consideration. I mean, anything that's said this evening, we'll be, willing to sit down and go over when we do the impacts and the studies with the T. It might be, I'm not sure if it can be done. What it does do, I can say, is anybody that lives on the opposite sides of the track in Ashland has to now go through downtown, okay, or up High Street and around. So what you're doing is you're forcing traffic that's already on the north side of the tracks up your street or through town and around.
Right, but we'll take the 10 or 15 people that want to take it from Ashland and give them the right of the road. We'll love it.
No, they wouldn't. Next.
My name's Darwin Blakemore. I live at 47 Ramblewood. I work in Hopkinton, and I've been in this town about 3 months now, and I'd just like to throw my support behind the gentleman that was just up. It took me about 3 days to figure out that coming from Hopkinton, if I took High Street, it was a much quicker route to get home. So I know people are going to be doing that. It's a much easier route. There's much less traffic. A lot on the south side of using the access to 135 is probably going to fill up real quick in the mornings. I just moved from Framingham, and I know that those lots, the T-station lots in Framingham, if you're not there by about 7:30, there's no place to park because they're just absolutely filled. So people are going to find the easiest ways around, and I think there's going to be a lot more traffic coming up through High Street to get to the north lot. So I just wanted to throw my own 2 cents in that's what I do, and I think that's what other people would do as well.
Thank you for your input.
My name is Sarah Hines. I live at 321 Elliott, which is on the other side of town. I'm on the Comprehensive Plan Committee, and I have been for a number of years. I've gone to a lot of these T-station meetings. I'm an architect. I'm very interested and involved in town planning as well. I just got through doing a 3-day seminar on town planning, and I brought up the question of this T-station to these experts that are nationally known that were there. And they said, traffic, they said retail, you're on the wrong thinking about traffic. It certainly doesn't belong in residential areas. But retail and businesses thrive on traffic. If you want to kill a downtown, you take away the cars. And it's interesting we have the business association saying whatever you say goes, which leads us back to the town. But the best thing of all is people walking by stores. If you have people parking towards the Telecron direction, walking to a station on the straight part, not on the curve, down toward where the old train station is, and guess what? When they did this town, they did that right. We will invigorate our downtown retail area, and no cars will be in front of people's houses from that. I think we're maybe being bamboozled by the traffic. If we have a 500-car lot, not 500 cars come on one train. Someone needs to do a real sensible look at how many people really get off the train per train in Framingham, and that'll probably take 2 people, one each side lot. It may be 100 cars. It may be 150, but most retailers will say, this is a good thing. We can build our downtown. If you look at our overview of our town, we're dying because we don't have tax base from business. And we're looking at ways to bring it in. We have a gift in the fact that a T-station is coming here. If you look at the other sites, the Magunko Road site is a killer. We lose 15 businesses or so that will never come back. The west site is going to impact residential, not to mention there's only one road, Porterville Road, that exits people from there. In the downtown, people can disperse very quickly. They can go to Framingham. There are many ways to get out of downtown. All of them take us by businesses. And they say, well, it's too late because the T's put in the switches. They've only been working a few days. If we had to dig up our old last year's snow plowing fund we didn't use and do it ourselves, it would be a tremendous investment. If we let it go, we're going to lose one of the best freebie chances we've had to invigorate our downtown. So that's it.
Joe Kelly from Wilbur Drive. I agree 100%. If I were a local merchant, I would welcome the T with open arms. I'm a resident, though, and I don't know exactly what this traffic study shows, but all I know is that without that study, I can go outside with my vehicle at rush hour and try to get out of High Street onto Pleasant Street and through the center of town, and I can't do it currently at rush hour. The longest part of my commute is just getting out of Ashland right now. That's without a T. The other thing is, if you put in the north side parking, people aren't mind readers. They don't know that that lot is full or not full, so they're going to try to go through there anyway. The cut through from Western Nurseries is obvious. That will happen. I'm opposed to the T station all the way because I just can't see the traffic on 135 at rush hour. All you've got to do is go out there at rush hour and take a look.
Thank you. John?
Downtown station. I would suggest that whoever thinks it's a good idea, go talk to the merchants in West Natick, go analyze the traffic when all the parking lots and spaces are filled over there, and watch the people come flowing across the street from the condos quarter of a mile away because there's no place to park. It's not a good idea to put it downtown. It would wreck it.
Zeb Cantress, I live on Wayside. I take the train every day now from Framingham, and if you want to be there at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, when most of the people come and get off that train, 135 and 126 are delayed for a long time. You put that train station in downtown, nobody's going to get out of town. And the other point is, you just have to be there every day and watch the parking. People are going to be spilling out of downtown onto all the streets where people live right now. They're going to be near Pitaway. It's not going to work. It's got to be someplace that's at least consistent with a decent-sized parking lot. The one that they just built on 135 was opened last year, which has about 70 spots, has made 135 about 5 times worse, because that's where all the morning people park. They get there first, and believe me, if you build a station on the north side, everybody knows what time it's full, because everybody knows what time the lots at Framingham are full. You park there every day. People aren't idiots. You come at 7 o'clock, the lot's full. The next day, you know it's full also. You don't show up every day looking for a space. You go somewhere else. But the question I have is, can the north side lot be made resident only?
You can't do that on a T station.
It seems like Wellesley has part of their station set up that way.
It could be that Wellesley might have a town parking lot.
Excuse me? It's a private station. All right, so make it a private station.
My name is Patricia Adams. I live at 202 Myrtle Street. I've been a resident here for 43 years. I drive through Framingham frequently during the rush hour. Those people don't stop to shop. They come off the train, they boot it to their car, and they get out of town. You can't count on them. Some of them might stop to buy a paper, but that's not going to keep the economy of Ashland going. I am against the downtown station.
The downtown station was looked at, and there's a major impact already in the downtown area with traffic. You cannot get through town. Right. Where did we leave? What exactly?
Excuse me. Rich Seiden from 6 High Street Extension. I would just like to know, having children, which a good majority of the newer neighbors have, there's about 50 new children in the neighborhood. When you do put the north parking lot in, what is Ashland prepared to do to make High Street much more safer? It's a scenic route. You can't have sidewalks. So what is my 2- and my 4-year-old going to do when he's on his bike on High Street when cars are going to be going by at about 40 miles an hour like they do now, and increase it by 100 to 150 cars a day, 300 cars a day, whatever?
There's 300 cars a day that go down High Street?
Not right now, but if you have a train station, there will be a lot more, and I'd like, an answer to that if you could.
And that's basically, your concerns are being written, and basically what we're talking about is traffic mitigation. That is one of the problems that has to be addressed. Do we have an answer to it? We don't know what the traffic impact there is yet, because we don't know if the station is actually going there yet, and the size of the lot.
Laura Whitkin, 17 Russet Hill.
I want to sort of get to question 7, because
Well, I'd like to go right down them, if we can. I was moving on to the next question.
well, it's sort of tied in. Would you
Okay.
mind skipping to that one?
No problem. You want to read it?
Sure. The MBTA projects a ridership of 2,500 by 1996, with the Ashland station contributing about 40%. It is also projected the need for 700 parking spaces in Ashland, while the Board of Selectmen wants only 450. It's been shown that the MBTA has seriously underestimated ridership and parking needs in the past, as evidenced by the Boston Providence Rail Service and the ridership to Worcester. And that's also by their own spokespersons. They say they've changed, they keep revising their estimates of ridership and parking needs. Part A is, does the Board of Selectmen want an Ashland station to be a regional station, as the projections seem to reflect?
No, the Board of Selectmen does not want to be a regional station.
How are you going to prevent it?
By limiting the number of cars. In
But as we've
negotiations
seen,
with the
there'll
team.
be overflow. We'll have cars parked on the street, on High Street, on, how are you going to stop that?
Tow.
He's a perfect revenue maker.
I mean, you know,
To tow these guys.
It's a two-folded question, and the question is that nobody out in that audience, I seem to think, would want Ashland to be a regional station. And neither does the Board of Selectmen. And then the drawback to that is if we're not a regional station, okay, and we build it appropriately to consist for the town and maybe the adjacent towns, and we size a lot at 400 or 500 cars or in between there, then the comment is, well, if you don't build it, where are the cars going to go? So you're saying, well, in one hand, we don't want to be a regional station, but if you're going to let it come in, let's be a regional station. Well, we don't want to be a regional station. And we don't want the traffic in your neighborhood. And we're going to do whatever we can to keep it out of your neighborhood. And that's going to be done through negotiations with the T, traffic mitigations, and or looking at parking areas if it has to be larger on one side versus the other. And those are all the considerations that are being looked at that are going to be negotiated with the T when we can sit down and talk to them, if they'll come in and talk to us. And that's the point that we're trying to get now. So, yes, input like this of concerns from the citizens about, you know, the sizes of the parking lot. The residents of the town say, if we're going to build it, should we build it big? Should we build it small? That's the input that we're looking for, exact questions like that.
Well, let me ask you, environmentally, can the South Side parking place...
Burnham side.
No, the other side.
South side, okay.
Can that only handle 450 cars?
We're not sure.
Because you limited that to that?
We're not sure. We don't know because we're doing they're supposed to be flagging it, and they're supposed to be, we've asked them to go in and design and do some work in there, which they haven't done yet. So we don't know what'll fit. Dexter?
The south side is going to be less than 450. 450 is total, both
It's total,
sides.
okay.
So if it's 200 on the north side, then it's only 250 on the south side, whatever the number is. If it's 150 on the, you know, whatever totals up to, the board has suggested 450 is the maximum that they will entertain.
Could be 350 and 50 on one side.
But what are you going to do with the extra 250 cars that can't fit?
Well, then the question is, should we build a station for every single surrounding community and build a regional station? And the answer is that the board feels that we shouldn't be a regional station, and I don't think the town wants to be a regional station. Yes, if anybody would like to make a comment, if they get up to the mic, we'll take them in order. No, I know, excuse me, if everybody would get up, you know, everybody would like to speak on it, I'm sure, but if you could get up to the mic.
Okay, Bob Whitkin, 17 Russet Hill Road. I'd like to read some projections of ridership for an Ashland station. Currently, 730, and it came from the DEI.
The
EIR report, right.
November 94.
Currently, 738, and then moving up in 5 years to 837. After 10 years, 962. After 15 years, 1,093 after 20 years, 1,242 after 25 years, 1,411, and after 30 years, 1,603. Now, they say that a station's life expectancy is about 30 years before it has to be remodeled or replaced or whatever. Just by saying we want to hold Ashland Station down to 450 cars, spaces, doesn't really deal with the possible reality of this. What happens? I mean, you have a T station. You're going to say 450 is the limit. Everybody else turn around and go home. That's not going to happen.
Those projections are riders, not cars.
Okay, let's.
So the cars are going to be much less. You're going to have people going. You're going to have drop off.
Okay.
They call it parking. No. I'm talking about parking in the parking lot.
That's right. Where is the, let me just clarify. The T projected, the numbers you're talking about, the T projected for this year, I guess in 1996, their numbers, unconstrained demand. That was their baseline. Unconstrained demand. I don't know how many things in life you guys encounter that are unconstrained demand, but even in unconstrained demand, their calculations, 589 spaces would be needed, okay, for cars, for 738 riders. Remember, some are going to be dropped off. Some people have more than one person in a car. So next year, if the station is built, unconstrained demand, 589 parking spaces, which would grow to around 900 in the year 2011. Now, these are projections that they made a few years ago. They're useful for planning purposes. They're useful for knowing what possible impacts are and what we may have to deal with. But I don't see why we should let them dictate rigidly what we're going to do. I mean, I think we need to understand that we can do some towing. We can try to control. These are just estimates. No one knows what's... If you look at the rate of growth in this area, almost anything could happen. They've got subdivisions going up in Holliston. You could do the same kind of projections for cars and say, we'll never fit cars anywhere.
Well, then
so we have to build more roads and more parking lots everywhere. And
well, then does that beg the question that once the T is in, can they not do what they want, and can they not expand even onto wetlands that a certain study will say, well, this is buildable, and then provide more parking?
Well, let me address your point then. What you're suggesting then is, you know, we should let them have whatever they're not even, we started this 700 car thing ourselves a few years ago when we wanted to meet demand. So your logic is let them have what they want now because possibly
my logic is prepare for the future, not just live in the present.
This is trying to, what we're trying to hit on is a reasonable accommodation that we think what might happen. People in town do not, you know, there's no reason why Ashland should function as a regional station with a lot of people from neighboring towns driving in here. If you build a large parking lot, they're going to come. That will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. They'll be on our streets more than if there's a 450 lot. I mean, you know, we're just trying to hit the right kind of compromise here. And we are, yes, I will say that, yes, people are going to be ticketed and towed possibly if they park. And some of those people may be from Ashland. They may be upset and want us to have built a larger lot. But we're trying to, like, do the reasonable thing here and say people need to understand they're not going to have everything they want. There's not going to be a huge parking lot sitting in Ashland waiting for them. And
our point is...
I'm willing to deal with those consequences.
Right, but the same, okay, but the same argument that you're using for downtown, where there wouldn't be enough spaces, so there'll be spillover onto the streets, where there are schools, where there are residents, applies to the west side as well.
Our point is that by the T's own projections, that by the year 2011, Ashland Station will have a demand for 880 parking spaces. They want 700. The town wants 450. You're going to have such a tremendous overflow, and by their own recognition, they say we underestimate. And it's been proven that they underestimate that there's going to be a lot more usage and need for parking. And our point is that the west side cannot handle it.
So is your point that we should be building it and making it as large as necessary,
No,
or that
we're
we should
saying
not
that
be
the
making
site
it at all?
cannot handle it.
We're saying that the west side cannot handle it. You can draw your own conclusions as far as where it can, what space is appropriate. But as far as the west side, if you're building a T station and you're building it too small, then you're fooling yourselves.
Can I ask
So-
you
so
what
then
site
don't
is
build it at all.
appropriate?
Why don't I ask you that, sir?
No, I'm
you've been
asking you.
You've been dealing with it for 3 years.
I am saying that as 3 years of work that's gone on by MBTA rail committees, okay, the site that was chosen is the west site. Now, are you saying that the west site can't accommodate what? Can it accommodate 100, or can it accommodate 1,000? If you have those foregone conclusions, then I appreciate that information.
Well, my foregone conclusions is that Ashland's going to grow. I think if you look, my understanding is in the last 3 years that it's grown by a considerable amount. And there doesn't seem to be any indication that that will let up in the next 5 or 10 years.
And I'm asking you to look at it, not as the homeowner up the street, but as everybody else on all these committees has looked at it. Are you looking at it because I don't want it in my neighborhood, or are you looking, when you're specifically...
Does it matter how I'm looking at it? Can we not address the issues rather than the whys that I'm suggesting
Yeah,
that
but
it's
the
too
issue
small?
is, no,
And if I want to have a not in my backyard attitude,
that's okay.
what's wrong with that?
That's okay.
Mr.
That's
Teller?
okay, but what I'm trying to ask is, and I'm trying to really understand what you're saying, is you're saying that this parking facility on the west will not accommodate it, okay? Are you saying that it won't accommodate because you know the specific number of cars that it will accommodate?
No, we're saying that they underestimate all their projections and that there's going to be more ridership than they say.
Okay, now, if we had come out and said they estimated the ridership at 700 and the board had gone forth and said, we want 700 cars on the west, then what is the comeback?
That depends on what the studies will show. And we're taking, now wait a minute, we're taking the
Mr. Chairman,
projections
Mr.
from their
Chairman.
own studies. You know, we're not just pulling numbers out of the air here.
Okay. I'm trying to understand what you said, and I'm still not
I
clear.
think what I'm trying to say is that the west side is too small, and if you build it, you're building it too small, and it will never accommodate the need for which it should.
In summary, I believe what he's saying is that limiting it to 450 cars creates more problems than it solves at this point, and we need to think about, is that realistic? I believe that's what you're saying.
That's certainly part of it.
Right. You finished? Did you want to jump ahead?
Felicia Healy, Sudbury Road. At the last selectmen's meeting that we were at, where the rail committee was also there, I don't see why Ashland's worrying about Holliston and Hopkinton and Southborough. Let's worry about Ashland riders. The suggestion was made at some point that possibly we or Dexter write a letter to Holliston, Hopkinton, Southborough, those other riders, and say, would you consider putting in a little commuter bus that your people would park in your own lots, and you all would take a bus and your bus would drop us off? We need to worry about Ashland. If Holliston wants to drive here, fine. They've already said you can't say that their projections are correct or they're not correct. They could be off the other way. We could have a lot of empty lots. But we haven't even gotten to that point yet.
That's correct.
That's what we're trying to say. They've set up the committee to, at least when the T does decide to get back to us, to bring up all these possibilities and all these questions. We haven't even gotten responses back from the T for the last 3 or 4 months.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Could you please get up to the microphone? If we're not going to get into a debate on the floor, I can promise you that.
But when the Board of Selectmen says that we must select the west side over any other past consideration, that to me says that this is the only consideration, therefore we don't want to discuss any other consideration, any other proposal.
At this current time, yes.
Okay, so then we are at that.
Because there's many reasons, if you read the EIR, why that has to be said. And one of the statements is that the east site has to be completely ruled out. So we did that. We ruled out the east site.
I'm Tom Robinson. I'm president of Nyakal Products, Inc. on McGunkle Road. I've been in town for about 14 years. Been residing there for about 8 years, it seems like, for the amount of hours I put in. I see John's ready to counter me here real quick. I want to get my licks in, as John says in his memos. I was involved in this process way back when the first word was issued about possibly bringing in a station. At that time, John and I met in my office, and in part of those meetings, we had some tea people there. And to coin John's phrase again, how do you stop an elephant? Well, you don't. It just keeps leaning. But you kind of train the elephant how far it goes because you tether it when it's young so that it understands it can only go so far. At that point, I was very fearful we're going to be right where we are tonight, and that's dealing with an emotional issue, not dealing with facts, not dealing with reason, and identifying with where do we want the best advantage for the town of Ashland. Now, I submit to you, how many people in this audience here right now, by raise of hand, feel that it would be appropriate, if we could find an appropriate way to do it, to have a station in Ashland? Okay. So with that in mind, we should look at it reasonably, take the emotion out of it, and not be doomed, at risk, dangerous nightmare, and all these kinds of things. Let's deal with factual issues. When we were talking about placing the station, the west came up as an alternative very early on because there is plenty of space there. I was quite aware of the wetland issue because I deal with environmental issues day in and day out. But I also was aware of the fact there are ways to mitigate that with transfer and to be able to identify with things that can be done to allow that to be placed there. It gives it containment, just as the people are saying here from the standpoint of flowing out, so that there is a bowl effect. The concern was, and rightfully so, what happens at the Burnham area. We talked about that from the standpoint that there needed to be a way to get off and on both sides, and they talked about an overpass. The overpass is going to be unsightly, and that was one of the reasons we want to move from the east, along with the issues of the environmentalists, because that area is contaminated, no matter what they say, still. There are businesses that are very drastically going to be affected, which you pointed out earlier, and it's unfair. The issue of the parking on the Burnham side was a concern from High Street, and John pointed out from the very beginning, was that with the overpass there and very limited, and people understanding it was very limited, it would keep the limit down. I understand the people's concern for the High Street, and I think there may be some consideration we ought to talk about in terms of making it larger on the, what do you call that, the north side? No?
South side.
The 135 versus the Burnham side. That's probably a pretty good alternative to think about. But there's still going to be people who are going to come down through that area. But the concern that it was more of the people coming from the South Borough, North Borough, in that direction. That's why the T picked that up. But you're going to get run over if you don't come back very explicitly. So this kind of a meeting is good. And from speaking from the business perspective, I don't want to see it go on the east. I'll go on record for that. I've been on the record. John knows I've been there, and I'll stay there. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Tom. John.
He was ahead of me.
Oh.
Peter Pothoff, Wilbur Drive. Several times tonight, more than several times, the issue of the size of the station has become somewhat contentious. And the numbers somewhere between 400 and 700 have been sort of bandied about. And I'm curious from the selectmen's perspective, where do they see the boundary of a regional station? Is 700 a regional station? I ask this question because as David sort of went through the historical litany at the beginning of the meeting and sort of outlined why various sites were passed over, for example, the Howe Street site was sort of passed over partially because of its closeness to Southborough and the fear that it would, quote, become a regional station. I'm trying to understand are we talking strictly about a size of station issue when we say that? Is that a code word for bigger than 700 cars? Or does that have some other meaning to the selectmen or the rail committee?
Peter, I think if you look at the size of the stations from Ashland out to Worcester, the size of the parking area in Worcester is how much? 400 and something cars in the city of Worcester. As they come from Worcester towards Ashland, the numbers hanging around 400 cars. 200 to 400, excuse me. When it hit the town of Ashland, we hit 700 cars. As the Board of Selectmen looked at it, we felt as though that Westboro wasn't going to be the regional station. Westboro was in, Westboro was out. Westboro saying we want it here, but if you can put a regional station over there. If everybody agreed today that they could put a regional station in Westboro, it could be 6 to 10 years before they could actually do it with the wetlands issue. As the Board of Selectmen looked at these issues, we felt as though that the T was trying to make Ashland the big station. And we didn't feel as though we could do that to the community. And that's how we came up to be in line with the other stations along the tracks that are gonna go online to be in the 400-car range. And that's the reason we felt as though as we went into negotiations with the T, we would set our demands, of which we haven't even talked to them yet, and we had to have a starting point. And we took our starting point at 450 cars. And we will go into negotiations with the T, and we're gonna proceed. And we're gonna proceed on the issues that have been addressed here. The size of the lot, the traffic mitigation, and all the issues that are being raised this evening and have been raised in the past. But if you want to know why we picked 450, that is the reason. That's one of the main reasons that we picked 450 cars. We do not want to be a regional station.
Dave, if I can just add, this may help. This helped me with my perspective. They're projecting 377 riders from Ashland alone. So that kind of gives you a perspective on, you know, how many people will be coming from out of town. So.
Thank you.
John.
The T's definition of a regional station is 2,000 to 3,000, and that's what they're talking about, 495, and they can't get it built because of environmental issues. It's not 700. But regional is used the same way that doom and all the other words that I used in my memorandum were, Tom, trying to get attention. The issue, we're really at the issue that matters. It's the issue of risk, size and risk. And that's what I was trying to get across in my memorandum, and I actually didn't do very well at it because it didn't really crystallize my own thinking until Sunday night. But the reality is that if we hold the station size to 450, there's a whole lot of places along from High Street all the way down to the curve of Telecron, a 450 lot can go. Doesn't have to go on the West Station. Doesn't have to go on the East Station. It can go in the Lateran parking lot. It can go off of Forest Avenue, go in the parking lot in the center of town. There's about 11 of them. The issue isn't 450. The issue is 700 or 900 that was, I can't remember the name of the folks who were up here a few minutes ago. And do we keep it down from there? And why, in the face of history of all the other sites, does this Board of Selectmen think that maybe we can hold them to 450? I understand all of the wishes of keeping Ashland small. I understand all of the wishes of only serving Ashland residents. But for those of us who live in Ashland and go to Framingham, we know that's not possible. Or for those of us who live in Ashland and go to West Natick, we know that isn't possible. Yes, we should meter it. But I think that we have to weigh the risks of neighborhoods and subsequent expansion off against a reasonable starting size. I didn't say that well in my memorandum, but that's what we're talking about here. Where to put it is also the right place. There aren't that many places that can take a bigger lot. There are many places that can take an undersized lot and then be expanded very badly, very, very badly with unfortunate consequences. And it's the 10-year out consequences that are bothering me perhaps more than the today consequences, because we're going to have to grow. I got a haircut yesterday. I know that doesn't mean anything to anybody here, but it turns out that there's a young man in this town that commutes to Worcester every day. His name is Matt Porter. He can't keep his car in the Worcester lot anymore. He has to take the bus. Why? Because the Worcester lot is full at 7:30 in the morning, and they just started service. They're going to expand the Worcester lot already. So I really urge the board to reconsider its numbers position. And if the west side can be built, to pack them in there at the beginning when you can mitigate the wetlands, because you'll never get them mitigated after the thing is already built south of the tracks.
I live in Worcester, so it'd be kind of nice to ride the train, but that's not my overriding reason for it. John, when we had a lot of discussions, we talked about the west side. An important, and you raised a good issue, is that that is an area that if it has to expand and it can be negotiated out to the town's advantage, that would be better there because there's more room and it's still contained. I believe there is more room than the 450. I've walked it, I've looked at it pretty carefully. But I think you're on the right track by starting at a lower number, if you're going to start anywhere, and then have the room to move, because they will move when they want to move, and it's a matter of where you want them to move and how you want them to expand. That's probably a better option for it than any other place, so keep that in mind too.
I have to agree. I don't think that the T is going to go in and work and look at the west side and corner themselves in completely either. They're going to look at it to know that what expansion availabilities there are on the west side before they go in. And I don't think that we're going to corner ourselves into a position where they only mitigate a certain portion of wetlands. Do we probably need 700 cars? it's something to probably look at. It's something that the Rail Committee has tossed around back and forth and really had a hard time coming up with a decision. When they came to that decision to the board, I respect it, because I respect the decision because they based that decision on numbers that were given to them. They felt as though that they couldn't bring a report to the Board of Selectmen of under 400 or 300 or 200 cars, and then we take that work that they did and accept that as fact. And then 2 or 3 years down the road, like which we're talking about, we find out that, wait a minute, maybe we needed 700, 800 cars. Those are the numbers that they came to us. We had to come up with a number to get into some sort of agreement and settlement and start negotiations with the T. We picked a number which was consistent with the other lines and the other stations to go online, and that's the number that we started with, and that's the number because we do not want to be the regional station. Even though 700 isn't regional, it's the regional of all those that are listed.
I'm Maureen McCaffrey. I live at 30 High Street. I have a couple of comments, actually. One of them I'd like to address the gentleman from Nyakall. There are several of us from the High Street area who've done a considerable amount of research on this issue and don't take it lightly. I don't think that, for the most part, the majority of us have a not-in-my-backyard attitude. I think some of us feel as though we didn't get to the Board of Selectmen before the business community over at the Cherry Street area did, and that the loss in tax income to the town is in the neighborhood, I think, of $37,000. I believe that's the number that you gave to us at the last meeting. You know, that may be an issue, but I'm not sure if that's the fact, if we're not dealing with emotional issues, if we're dealing with facts, if that's the fact that determined that the west site should be selected over the east site. I find it hard to believe that it came down to just that one point. I haven't really heard of too many other facts other than that the business owners over there had a possibility of losing all of their business by having to relocate. I think probably some of us need to know a little bit more about how you decided that that spot was definitely not the right place to go.
Another, just to update where you are, on the Cherry Street side, another one of the concerns that the board had is, as you know, Cherry Street abuts the Stone Park. Cherry Street is used as an access road now. A high degree of cars go up and down Cherry Street in the morning and in the evening. We felt that one of the main considerations is we wanted an access road built. If the station was built right at the corner of Cherry Street, going into Magunko Road, another concern was that the traffic would come down Cherry Street right into Magunko Road, which would definitely impact the downtown area, which could be a catastrophe to us. That's another one. There are many, many considerations. You're right, that wasn't the only consideration. The other consideration is it's contaminated property under the control of the EPA. The list goes on and on against the east site.
Well, those are things that are important for us to know, and it's not that I have this particular attitude that it just doesn't belong down at the bottom of the hill. You know, I'm sure if that's where it ends up being, I'll be happy with that so long as we can control the traffic. I live at the bottom of High Street, just before you get to our amazing bridge. And most of us in the neighborhood probably aren't as cautious as we should be driving down the hill at 60 miles an hour or whatnot. I have the same concerns that Mr. Hebden did about people coming through that area. I know that my mom lives in Hopkinton. She works in Framingham. She frequents our street quite often just to avoid the traffic. She drives slow, just in case anybody's wondering. My second question is about mitigation. I've contacted everybody I know at the MBTA. I work on a few MBTA projects myself as a contractor. I haven't gotten anywhere with them either, but I do know for a fact that when this contract is decided on, it'll go out to bid in its entirety, and there will be no community involvement about where should sidewalks go or crosswalks or curbs or changes in the roadways after it's decided upon and you've got 100% plans. It's going to be constructed by one contractor and only one, and there won't be any involvement after 100% plans have gone out. I understand you're saying that 30% plans are complete. I don't know if they've proceeded any further than that, but what I'd like to know is how can we get involved right now with the mitigation process as opposed to waiting till it's too late?
We received a letter from the MBTA, and one of the questions or the concerns, they want to know who the contact people were so that we could start the process of questions and concerns about mitigation, traffic impact, and those issues. Those issues will be addressed, and that's where we're at. We have to pick a site to start addressing those issues. That's why we got together, we picked a site, and we have to start working on issues and concern, which are mitigation issues. In our letter, that's what we want to do, and start working with the T. We have formed, which you can see, the subcommittee. As soon as we get a response from the T, those are the issues that we want to start working before. You're right, before this goes any further. What you are saying is 100% correct. It's the same feeling that the board has. We want to start working on these traffic concerns and issues so we know the impacts now, not at 100% when the station platform is built. David.
You know, it's amazing that in the last 3 years, I don't know where everybody's been hiding, but they must have been hiding in a cell, because this proposal has been on the board for the last 3 years. And there's always been an east site and a west site. Now, the folks on the east site came before us a year or so ago and said, geez, you know, here's our concerns, and when they listened to them. But there was never anybody from the west, even though that was still always an active situation. Then all of a sudden, now that the board has made a choice, everybody is coming forth. I have never seen so many professional traffic analysis in my whole career. And being on the planning board, I have to get to read these things all the time. But I've never seen so many people have all the numbers and facts about traffic and traffic patterns as I have tonight. What we're talking about also was the way that some people decide that where all the traffic is going to go. But that's a small point. You know, this has been a 3-year process. And Maureen just had a very good point. She said, what are some of the other effects? There's a heck of a lot of other issues. And one of the things I'd like to present tonight is you've got 6 months to decide. 6 months to decide, or the MBTA comes and does what they want. We have 6 months to ask for whatever we want. And if we don't come to grips with that, if we don't say, this is what we want, this is how we want it, and let it get negotiated, we are going to lose everything. Because you're absolutely right. The MBTA has a right to come in and do whatever they want. And myself, being on the planning board, I would like to have at least a say to try to protect the citizens in the town of Ashland. But if I lose that say, I can't do anything about that. But I'm trying to keep my say in place. This is important. And what John's pointing out is a good fact. Yes, we may start off with 400. But nobody's going to stop the MBTA from 5 years down the road or 8 years down the road going around saying, I'll buy your business and start a satellite parking lot down the road. But we got to deal with just what we have today. And as I said, if you don't, we're going to lose it. And it's extremely important that everything that everybody says tonight is important so that the members of the negotiating team can go forth and say, these are issues. Traffic is always an issue. I sit and I have a meeting at least twice a month listening to every citizen in the town of Ashland scream about traffic when a subdivision is being built at the end of their street. I understand that. I totally understand. The town is growing. I'll tell you right now, there's probably 400 or 500 homes on the market. They're going to be built. But what do we do with it? What are the suggestions? Sidewalks, screening. This is what we want to talk about. Intersections. If you guys got any ideas of intersections, please let us know about it. It sit here and scream about 300, 400, 500 cars. They're going to make that decision for us. But we have to look at where you live and where you live, where the people on Pleasant Street was, where's the businesses on Montgomery Street were. We have to take that in all consideration. It's going to land someplace. You have the ability to say something right now. In 6 months, you're correct. But I mean, no, it's not that actually, it's not that I don't like what you're saying. That is not what we're saying. But then you're telling me the negative aspects. Now tell me, what is the solution? Mrs. Morissette had a solution. Let's just say no. There's a solution. Do you have a solution to your problem? You're saying there's an issue here that you see, Is there a solution? If there's a solution, let's hear it. Because if we don't have the solution for them to negotiate for, we have nothing. And they are going to do what they want to do. So all I'm asking for is, if there's any suggestions, positive and the negatives, the counteraction of the negative suggestions, please bring them forth, because they are running out of time.
Next.
My name's Dick Collins. I live on Ramblewood Drive, and the figures that the gentleman gave before are correct. They're right out of that study, but I'd like to point out that those figures are based on the assumption that the 3 stations come online simultaneously, and I believe they also include the regional station. I'm not sure about that.
No, they don't.
They don't, but they do include the 3 stations coming online simultaneously. So if in fact, from my feel for the situation is I'm not hearing anything about Westboro happening, but that may or may, I don't have any good information on that, but what I'm hearing, I don't hear any noise from those communities, so I assume, I don't see any evidence that within the time that the Ashland station opens, within 90 days, there'll be a Southboro station or a Westboro station. And so those figures then are grossly understated, if in fact that's the scenario that plays out.
We did send the T a letter asking and demanding that they open at the same time.
I guess my question really is, what are you going to do if they don't? Because that's the serious problem.
You bring up a really good point. It's the first time that this point's come up. And in what we've been doing in the process, it's probably the one area that I think we could have done a lot better job, and that's in communicating with these other towns. The problem that we've had is that it's really difficult to communicate with the neighboring towns regarding their stations when you don't really have your act together what you want to do in your own town. So that delayed us a little bit. But certainly, I think one of the major items on the agenda right now is to keep from happening exactly what you're talking about, or if it's going to happen, know it's going to happen ahead of time. And that is to form a meeting, a joint meeting with Southborough and Westborough, the selectmen, and have a meeting and find out, not through the newspapers, which are not always totally accurate, right, Dwight? Or through a CAC or through the T, but directly from those other communities, the decision makers, what their plans are. Because what their plans are definitely do impact what happens in this community. So it is something that's going to be addressed from here on out.
There are issues that are discussed by the CAC, which is the group that meets with all the towns. And that information, we do have a member on there who comes back and reports, who is the chairman of the Rail Committee. So we do get the information from the other communities, not to the degree that we would want to now that it's getting down to this point. And Barry's suggestion of meeting with the other boards is a very good suggestion.
There are some practical suggestions on what we can do. One of them is to spread out the parking lots further along. Don't make them right there convenient at the train station. People have to walk further, so the time in which they get into cars and start driving through traffic is extended, so you don't have everyone hitting the ground at once. Also, if it's a less pleasant station to use, people won't come jamming in here. If they have to walk a quarter of a mile, most people will walk a quarter of a mile. I still think the Telecron site, in that respect, there's hidden lot across on the Telecron side, and Telecron could have the right to lease spaces over on Route 135. Once you have people walking to different routes before they get in their car, you're dispersing a lot of the traffic. But that's an idea that could work no matter where. May have a couple of 200 car lots spread out. And we also forget we can ticket and tow and actually make quite a bit of money educating people not to park where they're not supposed to. So there are positive things if we just turn around the thinking about it. So, okay.
Hi, I'm Rob Daly from Empire Circle. Kind of being a new person on the scene in regard to this east site, it was mentioned earlier today, this evening, that it was kind of ruled out because of concerns with the EPA levying the cost of the cleanup to the landowners. And I'm just wondering if anyone had ever approached the EPA to see if they would be cooperative in waiving those fees to make it an easier site to develop.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, I didn't know if it had been.
Yes, that's cast in concrete at this point.
Claudia Bennett, Sandstone Way. I'm wondering the access road on 135, has anybody looked at how many, cars could you, how big a parking lot could you actually build? If you needed in the future to build a larger parking lot, is there land in there that would be usable for that purpose somewhere down the line? And also, if you were going to limit the parking spaces on the High Street side, just say a very minimal amount, maybe just for the immediate residents of the area, would it then be possible to do something with the land that they're presently looking at to use for a parking lot, or maybe even, not have any parking spaces at all there? Is it possible to do something with the land that would be used for a parking lot that later on they couldn't come in and take for any reason? For example, straighten out the High Street Bridge and use that land, so it wouldn't make sense to come in later and try to build a parking lot. Or perhaps, it's my understanding that if a church owns land, you can't take it by eminent domain. Well, can we give it to a church? And therefore, the land would never be able to be taken by the T?
What's that? Yeah, they can take a church, but they won't.
Hi, I'm Milton Morissette from High Street. I want to go back a little bit to item 6 in your letter. And it says you must have an equitable formula. Do you know the one I'm reading about? Yeah. For Ashland's MBTA assessment must be established as an integral part of the acceptance by the town of Ashland as a station site. Now, it's my understanding, it's foregone conclusion. Whether you have a formula or not a formula, you're going to have something here. So what is the formula that you're going to push out so that we get a station or we don't get a station? And also, if they don't have a station in Southborough and down west of here, how are you going to fight that? You're going to say, no, if you don't have one down there, we won't?
No.
You already said there's going to be one here. So we want the best we can get, right?
Right. That formula is money. Those are dollars.
Yeah.
That's the money that the town of Ashland pays to be part of the MBTA.
Yeah, right.
We are paying that whether we have a station or we don't. We have been paying it for the last, how many years? 46 years. We are saying that over $300,000 is paid by the town of Ashland. What we're trying to do is either make it an equitable formula among MBTA communities. A lot of communities like Franklin and the new communities like Southborough and Westborough that will go online pay nothing. The town of Ashland is paying over $300,000. What we are saying in number 6 is that if a station is going to come to the town of Ashland, we have spoke to the senator and our state senator and legislator, and we're saying they will back us on this, that we are looking for a fair and equitable formula for that. If Ashland is going to be assessed at that degree, we're saying no station. Other stations are going to go online and pay nothing, and they are paying nothing, and we don't think it's fair. And we're going to fight for the people of the town.
I was wondering if this would help the people who live in High Street, and I understand your fears with the traffic and your children. Can the entry, I guess it's near what, Weston Nursery? Can that be mitigated in such a way that it's one way in the morning and one way in the afternoon? Would that solve, that would solve the traffic problem? Would that assuage your fears? Is it Hopkinton? Can we get the town of Hopkinton to do it? What do you mean no? I mean, we could ask them. I mean, is it possible to get the selectmen of Hopkinton to do that?
I'm not sure we could ask.
I mean, wouldn't that solve the problem for the people on High Street?
We would have to have both town. We would have to have the other town approve it.
Or make High Street one way, either way. But there must be a way to control the traffic that way. And that way, then the north lot would become usable for the people who live up on Oak and up in the Oregon area. they're gonna have to come all the way around. I mean, it's kind of, unfair to them if you don't build a lot someplace north. I mean, you're talking about them having, and again, then you're gonna have all the traffic pattern going right through town for everybody north of town who wants to come and use the station.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
Kathy Glinsky, I'm on the Rail Committee. I was appointed on May 26th. I'm also a resident of Cherry Street. The brainstorming here has brought some ideas forth that I haven't heard before or thought of. One of them was by Bobby Hebden to eliminate the north parking lot. There's a possibility there. I think that should be examined. If not, maybe Ashland can buy the land and make it a resident parking lot. That's a possibility. Anybody not resident, that will give us revenue. Ticketing, earns some money there. So that's something that I think we should look at if the Rail Committee is still going to go forward. I don't know if we are. Another idea was, if it goes on the west side, which has been proposed, and they can only put 300 or 350 parking spots, but they want to negotiate for more, the access road possibly in the future could hold a parking garage that the MBTA would build that could house 200 or 300 or 400 cars. So if we only built for 450, with the majority of them on the north side, the expansion could possibly be handled by a parking garage built by the MBTA. And one of the things that somebody said was, why worry about Holliston and Hopkinton take care of Ashland? Ashland happens to be a town that has a railroad track coming through it. So we do have to consider the other towns coming in. I mean, they do come in, we have to consider that. That's all.
Peter?
Peter Pothoff, Wilbur Drive. I just wanted to point out that the gentleman from the Planning Committee was overlooking Mr. Hebden's comments about limiting the west site to just south of the tracks as a realistic solution to present tonight, and just to make sure that got recorded for the people who are doing the negotiating.
No, I don't want anybody to think that what they're saying is not important or anything like that, and it is. And I know our committee and the Rail Committee wants to hear everything everybody has to say. And the more you hear, the more information you get, and a lot of good points have come up. So, it's important.
Yeah, my name is David Loud. I live at 12 Russet Hill Road. And I am not against an MBTA station in the town of Ashland, if it can be done properly. I think my main concern currently, in the way it's drawn up in the west, is the 172 spaces that are proposed right off of High Street, which would well, that's according to this plan that I have.
Right.
And I really think it's more of a public safety concern than anything else that I have for, obviously, the traffic, more so than anything else, and of course, obviously, the environmental wetlands. I have a couple other questions just to clarify. Is the Telecron site officially known as the downtown site, or is there an alternate also?
Known as the Telecron site location.
Okay.
Ashland Technology was another one, named word for it.
Okay. And one of the things I was thinking about earlier was, as I was sitting there, was the east site and the Cherry Street and the kids spot, as you were mentioning how that traffic mitigation would be. But I tend to think that if we think that's a bad area, that if you can figure of the cars that were going to be on High Street around those corners and in the wintertime coming down that hill, that that's something that really has to be closely looked at as a public safety for everyone who lives there. I also think that if you take a look at the original access road that one of our neighbors put up, the length and distance and the cost of such a road put in from the west site, if we could take a look at that at the Telecron site and think about the tax dollars that would be spent to have to get in on 135 from that angle, that maybe we could do something with the bed and the curvature of the road. I've taken a drive around that site, and if you look at the way the traffic patterns go, we already have the bridge over by the veterinary hospital. We have a pretty decent access road and access roads right there with lights currently at Dairy Queen and an entrance by the auto body. I don't know, maybe this is something that you guys have already thought about, but it looks to me like maybe putting it down further on that tracks, I don't know if there's enough spaces. I mean, has anybody really looked at that sort of an angle?
That was one of the original site locations that was looked at, the Telecron site. The area where it's Telecron, the parking lot in the back, is if you take a ride over the Fountain Street Bridge and look, the tracks go like this. It's a real bad curvature in the tracks. The T was saying They couldn't place a T-station on the curve in the tracks, and the reason being is that T does not own the tracks are owned by Conrail.
Okay.
Another concern by Conrail is that with a train loading with the weight shift, the switches could come off and they wouldn't know that a train was actually there. They do not want to put a station on a curve in the tracks. But just to follow up on something that you've said, to bring up another question that you have in here, which is question 8, with the projected cost of the access road on Route 135 estimated at $1 million, could the money be used to make the Telecron site workable? I have no idea who come up with $1 million, and
Well, I think if you look at a scale map,
there's no access road designed by the T at this point, so we don't even know how the T can get in there and what the cost would be. They don't have a designed road going in there.
so it certainly could be higher.
It could be, we don't know.
Okay.
It could be
But-
$6 million.
But are the businesses...
We don't know.
Are the...
Off of 135.
Correct.
Right. Going into this, right.
What did the Ashland business community think about that site as opposed to, I can understand certainly nobody wants to take anybody's businesses, and if we're paying taxes and with the liens and the EPA, that makes a lot of sense. But how would the businesses feel about something like that and the money that would be invested on such an access road to be spent on maybe straightening the tracks and developing that whole section in downtown Ashland?
I guess one of the questions, I'm not a Conrail person, but I know that straightening, lowering, or raising tracks, for everything that you do this way, or this way, you have to go back so far. And we're talking serious dollars, I guess.
Okay, and just one other point I'd like to bring up. We were talking about the size of the lot, and I'm sorry, I happen to have just a copy of that 30% submittal.
Okay.
And just for public knowledge, there's already proposed 534 spaces alone on that side. And thinking about expansion, I think probably my greatest concern is strictly on the High Street side. And I'd like to go on the record as being opposed for anything on that, I guess would be considered the northern side of the west side approach.
Northern side of the track, by
Exactly.
Burnham's.
And I think that could be workable on the other side, or the Telecron side. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to mention a meeting with Conrail?
No, I didn't. Just as a matter of information for everybody here, I think, if you're not aware, the High Street Bridge is projected to be reconstructed next year. Bids will be done by the state this year for construction next construction season. And I have some concern about it, although there's not much we can do, that's going to be a straight shot from halfway up the hill down to Pleasant Street. It is going to be a straight shot and a wide bridge similar to House Street. So that's another issue that we have to deal with, and I know you don't want to hear it, but at least I'm telling you that that's the way that it is. That's another problem that we will have to deal with as far as enforcement. So it's not going to, we won't have the problem with the curves. We'll have other problems with cars coming down the bridge to Pleasant Street.
Laura Whitkin, Russet Hill Road. Supposing that the West Side Station is built, and supposing that none or very minimal parking is on the Burnham side, and with the majority of the parking on the south side, can you have only one access road from 135 to that parking area? Is that feasible? Is that a hazard? Is the T going to want to make another access, like maybe High Street? No. You can have one access to that spot?
The MBTA Rail Committee had discussed the problem if everybody came in off of 135 and the lot was full. One of the discussions was an emergency gate to bring them onto the other side.
Emergency?
You're talking about for traffic? Where is she talking?
I'm talking about the access to that south side lot. You're only proposing one access.
Right.
The only way in and out is that 135 access road.
And what's your concern about that?
That it may be a hazard, that will another access route
There
planned?
had been discussion about putting an emergency access, emergency vehicles only, fire, police, and so forth, off of High Street, but I don't know where,
Yeah.
but no, it's not gonna be for regular traffic. It'll be barred, gated, locked, secured. We've got,
There's only one small
we've got
step
those
to
in other-
making that an access for anybody.
no, I don't, that's not the intent. Nobody has discussed that at all as being an access. Right by the bridge, right where the bridge is now. There's a,
That first house.
the T has, the state has taken access to the properties off to the side when they've taken the properties to relocate the bridge. And
What?
no. Well, if I go from Pleasant Street up, immediately across the bridge, on both sides of the bridge, there's a triangle piece of land on the west side of the present road. There's a triangle piece of land on the right side of the road going up the hill. It's owned by Gaynor, and Gaynor has access to the road presently from the left side to his property. When the state highway department straightens the road, they're going to move it over. They'll move it into the triangle that Gaynor owns and allow access via right-of-way over state property to Gaynor's property, which would be on the east side of the left side of High Street going up. So the state has provided access to those properties by the fact that they've taken easements over, or given easements over state land to the property owners on Gaynor on one side and taken Gaynor's property on the other side. Did I confuse you more? Yeah. Well, I can only say that there is access to the High Street, either where it is now or where it's going to be, to the proposed station on the south side of the tracks, westerly location. And that has been discussed by the Rail Committee as an emergency access to a parking lot should it be built on the west side, south of the tracks. Not for regular vehicular traffic, emergency use only.
Bob Whitkins, Russet Hill Road. Can you tell me, are there any plans other than Little League Park for Grinzel Park? Does the Board of Selectmen or does the town have any right to say, or does the T have any right to say, we want that land for parking?
It's in a floodplain, but...
Well, then again, so is, I guess, a few other sites down near there.
The T could come in and take the land by eminent domain. They can take land from the town as well as from a private owner for use. As I mentioned, it is within the floodplain, but there are things that can be done within a floodplain. If they asphalt over floodplain, they have to make compensating wetlands adjacent to, so they wouldn't be able to use the entire area. I don't believe it's been designated as parkland. So, I don't believe it's been designated as a parkland, so they could take it because it's just town land. Now, that's got to go through several steps to get to that point, and I'm not sure that the town would want to do that. But that's not in the cards. They haven't discussed that at all.
Is there a problem with doing that? I mean, that the town wouldn't want to?
There is a potential, there is a former well site is on the property, and that then brings in DEP and other areas of concern as well as use as a park. So I'm not,
okay.
We've been running around with that to try to abandon the well so we can expand the Little League fields, and we're having a whole lot of trouble with that. So that's a whole other issue.
And not to get off the subject, however, I would just personally like to take exception to just about everything you said in your last tirade at the microphone. And
excuse me. I understand, but...
Excuse me, you were
excuse me, this is our meeting. I don't want to get into what we're going to get into. There's really no reason. I understand your opinions, okay, and those happen to be his opinions. Let's not get into, I don't like you, you don't like me, and I don't like what you say. Please.
We're not getting into that, sir.
Let's keep it on a very even flow, and let's all work together.
I just want to make a comment that, as a new resident, I feel that I have a voice, I have an opinion, and I'm not a moron, and an opinion is as valid as any others. And I don't need somebody looking at me saying that, well, you don't count because you haven't been here long enough, or where were you 3 years ago? I wasn't in Ashland. I'm sorry.
You do have an opinion, and we do appreciate everything that you do say, seriously. But we don't want to get into a... Matt, thank you.
I wish you were. There may be some of these questions and things would have been brought up a long time ago.
Can we keep
Well,
this to, it's running late, and
One
it's very
of the,
hot.
a couple of things that I just want to point out, doing some research and talking to the gentlemen who are putting in switcher tracks, by putting in those switcher tracks in the location they're putting in, it eliminates pretty much all except for two sites, east and west, period. So Telecron and any other things that you want to look at are history. Well, I'm only taking one gentleman's opinion from that on who was working on the tracks, but again, knowing this process and knowing what we've all been going through, that's hearsay, and I'm only passing on what I was heard from the gentleman. The second thing is, I believe that probably we're only going to have I said 6 months that we're going to have to work this out. I've been informed, I think, that it's going to be shorter than that. The final ERA is being written probably and starting in September. And that's the final. And along with that final is going to come probably the 70% one site only plan. And I'm only bringing this up for the fact that it just tells us that we've got a little bit shorter period of time to try to make things conducive for the town of Ashland and all who live in the town of Ashland, whether you're new, old, or just arrived yesterday.
Arnold?
I just want to go back to the gentleman that previously spoke. Be assured that we will fight to keep Prince Park. And as far as, I'm one member, but I think we all feel the same. Nothing is cast in concrete yet about anything. I think, as I said previously, the Telecron's a viable plan. And so, in other words, even though we've taken these steps now, nothing's cast in concrete, but the negotiating committee is going to certainly talk to the MBTA and try to work something out favorable to as many people as you possibly can.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Steve Black. I live at 7 Baldwin Circle in Ashland. My shell was also broken a year ago when I moved to this town, not knowing what was going on with the train station up until 4 months ago is when I initially get started in my interest. The only thing I'd like to say is this. We have a traffic problem now, right now, in that area of town. There's a lot of new families up there. There are a lot of children up there. It is a safety issue, as Dave has talked about earlier. It should be looked at now. Never mind the situation that we may have in the future with the possibility of much more traffic up there. That's all I got to say. I know you're concerned about the children. I know everybody in this room is concerned about the children. I don't have children at this point up there. Soon, but not soon, very soon. But it is a problem up there, and that's all I got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could, just before we go, to move things along, I know there's some questions that we would add. Is that having to do with the same question, or do you want me to move along?
Actually, no, I have just something, once again, David Loud from 12 Russet Hill Road. I just wanted to, one question, we were talking earlier before about the east site being ruled out once again because of, I think it sounded like it was like more of a legal issue with the taking of the land, and I wondered why that was the MBTA's favored site originally, and how come that was discounted because, well, whose money?
The MBTA's.
MBTA's money said, well, we don't want to spend the money because of the legality issues?
No, I mean, it's cheaper for them to go in there
The east site was cheaper for the T.
to build.
Correct. So why do we recommend the west site?
We're not concerned about what the T spends. We're concerned about the residents in the town of Ashland.
I understand there's X amount of businesses there. How many businesses would be disturbed?
14.
And how many actual landowners are there?
5, I think.
So
5
you're
or
talking
6.
about disrupting 5 parcels of land.
No, there's more than
16?
60.
60 employees. 60.
Wait.
I understand that. Please, don't get me wrong. I am not.
No, he's
this
trying
is not
to-
a witch hunt. What I'm asking is, if there's only 5 pieces of land, so everyone else is renting, basically has leases.
Well, it's
that
like
would
any business in town. If you put an office building up, you might have 15 businesses in there, but
And
whatever.
I've been down there. There's not an
Right.
easy place to put a lot of those businesses. Understanding that, if we could find a way to relocate the businesses within Ashland, and also maybe find a way that we could actually sell what would be considered, I believe, contaminated land to the MBTA for a train station, that sounds to me like a pretty good idea.
But the point
Can't be
that's
done.
being missed is, as you being a property owner, you now owe part of $25 million in the settlement of the cleanup of Nyanza because of your adjacent property being affected by it. You are a contributor to the cleanup, of which they are. They haven't been able to touch their property, including dig on it or put a fence on it, for 16 years. They're in final negotiations. They're working out a plan with the EPA for a settlement. If at this point the T came in and took their property by eminent domain, they would take their property and the EPA would get the money. They would have no land, no business, no nothing.
And that certainly is not what anybody is in anyone's interest. I want to make that clear. But if there was a way that they could get a settlement, is it just impossible? I mean, am I just throwing it up in the air? It would just never happen. Okay.
You're dealing with a large federal agency.
Sure.
And the Superfund is just unbelievable. What they've done in Ashland, what they've cost the taxpayers, what they've done for the project.
So how come they're going after these guys?
And the impact on innocent landowners.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't their problem. How can they
That's
be,
the law.
how can you be held accountable? I mean,
That's the law.
If you purchased their property today, you would be responsible for the cleanup.
No, thank you. Thanks.
Anybody who purchases property that's contaminated is responsible for the cleanup. It doesn't release you from being responsible. You are still part of it. If the T buys the property, then the T would become part of it. But it doesn't take them off from their owing any money. They are just added to the list. Excuse me? No. No. Well, they have to split it up between the property owners. Well, let's put,
They won't collect it all, but they're going to try their darndest to collect it all. I mean, if they collect 10% of it, they're going to collect 10% of it.
and in the meantime, these people can't, they have attachments against everything they own. They can't even go to the bank. Sure.
Just in regards to the concern about traffic on High Street, I guess as I approached this, I made the assumption that with the access road, we weren't really looking at a traffic problem on High Street. And I think we owe it to people to take a second look at that and make sure we know what we're doing. But one thing, in terms of these projections that we're talking about, depending on how much you believe the projections they're talking about, and Frank just reminded